to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to turn it over to Berber Kramer to get us started with a couple minutes of intro on behavioral research before we lead into Martina's presentation. So Berber.
Thank you, Adam, and good afternoon, everybody from here in Nairobi. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm sure we're all very busy winding up 2023. I'm a senior research fellow with IFPRI, and within the CGIAR Market Intelligence Initiative, I lead a team of researchers that generates behavior intelligence around planned breeding. And I thought it'd be nice to share a little bit more about that work as an introduction to today's webinar before we really jump into some of this more specific work that we do. In our work, we really focus on the question, what drives farmers, consumers, and private sector decisions to adopt new varieties and related products. And as part of our research, we test different strategies to influence variety replacement and product substitution decisions by consumers and farmers. And we look at how each of these different strategies for varietal promotion affects adoption in subsequent seasons. So it's really good to see that this is actually an area in which a lot of you are indicating we need to know more, as indicated by the poll. Right now, we have a set of coordinated experiments in 5 different countries with 3 CGIAR centers and 6 study teams in the field. And this is really exciting work through which we're testing a range of different interventions to accelerate varietal turnover. We're testing strategies that don't only focus on encouraging farmers to take up new varieties to plan them from the producer perspective, but we also look at strategies to increase consumers' willingness to adopt new varieties and translate that into now growing these varieties into their own fields. So what we really are aiming to do is to generate cost effectiveness of different promotion strategies, not just in general, but really looking at what traits require which promotion strategies, because you can imagine that promoting a drought-tolerant variety requires very different interventions and might come at different costs than promoting, say, a more nutritious variety, of which perhaps the benefits are not as visible to farmers and to consumers, at least not in the near term. So that's a bit of a larger overview of the work that we're doing by means of introduction to what will be presented in today's webinar. I'm excited to share with you one of the outputs from our research this year based on qualitative baseline research that we have done, coordinated across all these 6 studies that are coordinated across our package of work. This work will be presented by Martina Cavicchioli. Martina is an independent research consultant, and she leads the global qualitative and gender research within our behavior intelligence work package in market intelligence. Until August 2023, she worked as a gender specialist at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, so IITA in Ibadan. She holds a PhD in social and cultural anthropology from the University of Frankfurt, and her research experience is in gender, land rights, land use, and land breeding in Africa. Martina, thank you so much for leading our qualitative behavioral intelligence research, and also for volunteering today to give this very first GI webinar. We're very excited to see your presentation today. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Berber, for this introduction, and thanks also to Adam. I'm also excited to share this results. So let me share my screen, just 1 second. So can maybe just one of you give me, no, just say if you can see my slides. Perfect.
Looks good.
Okay, let me just reduce this bar because otherwise I cannot see my slides. This might be a problem. All right. So again, good afternoon, everyone, also on my behalf, and thanks so much for your interest in this webinar. So today I'm going to take you through the results of a qualitative study that we conducted this year under the Market Intelligence Initiative, the work package on behavioral intelligence, which Berber has already introduced. It's a study that indeed brings together evidence from 5 different countries, 6 case studies in total, 10 different crops, so it's a very rich data set. And it's a study about understanding what drives or hinders varietal turnover, meaning what informs farmers' decisions about which variety to plant on their fields and how are new seeds currently being promoted. Today, I'm actually representing a larger team of qualitative researchers who have really worked hard to put together the results that I will be presenting today. So all of them have put a great contribution in this work, and I'd like to thank all of them. I know some of them are also part of this webinar, and I encourage them, of course, if they want to contribute to the discussion. So let us start with a very quick introduction about the objectives and the background that informed our study. So we know that there are a lot of crop varieties that have been bred in the past years and decades, many of which, of course, meet very urgent production and nutrition challenges. But as research shows, the uptake rates of these varieties are still very, very low. So we want to understand with this research why this is the case. There is a lot of adoption research that points at different factors that may justify this low uptake rates. For instance, some, as you have also seen in the poll, of course, suggest that some varieties may not be affordable or accessible to farmers. According to others, there might be a misalignment with farmers' priorities, or that farmers may not know about these varieties, so informational barriers in that sense. Or in some other instances, seed promotion may not be as effective at reaching farmers or encouraging them in taking up new varieties. So with this study, we want to bring together the perspective of farmers and seed sector actors from both the public and the private sector. From farmers, we would like to know how do they decide what to plant in their field and which barriers do they face in taking up new seeds. From the seed sector sides, we'd like to understand which seed promotion strategies are currently ongoing in the respective countries and which barriers they have faced in promoting new varieties. So by bringing these perspectives together, we should be able to come up with some possibly recommendations at the end of this presentation that shows how seed promotion strategies could be more effective at increasing uptake of new varieties, but more specifically at adopting approaches that are more inclusive and that contribute, of course, to healthier diets and more resilient livelihoods. So this is a very quick overview of the 6 case studies that we have synthesized in this global work. 2 of these were in Uganda, which is why we will keep talking about 5 countries. As you see, we targeted different crops in each country. All of these crops, which brings together cereals, tubers, and legumes, all play a relevant role in the local production systems of the respective countries. Most of these are very well integrated in the local marketing and consumption habits. And this is quite important for you to understand part of how we interpreted our results. Briefly on the methods. It's a qualitative research indeed. We conducted data collection this year between March and August. As a qualitative research, we focused mostly on field observation, but most importantly with conversations with our interlocutors, in this case, farmers and representatives from the seed sector. So we conducted focus group discussions and interviews with women and men farmers. In total, we had a sample of around 800 farmers from all over the countries, of course, and around 100 key informant interviews with seed value chain actors from the public and the private sector, representing different actors, of course, agro-dealers, governments, champion farmers, and so on. So let us start looking at the results. Since this is a very rich part of this presentation, I have decided to cut it into 3 parts along the 3 main lines of inquiries that informed our research. I'll just get you quickly through them as you see them at the bottom left of this slide. So we are going to look first at who in the household takes decisions in varietal uptake. And then after seeing who takes decisions or which criteria informs who should be involved in decisions on which variety to plant, we would look at the factors that influence women's and men's decisions about what variety to plant. And then last, we will look at the seed promotion strategies and see which of these are more accessible to farmers and more effective at encouraging them to take up new varieties, and why, of course. So we'll start with the first of these big questions, of course. So who decides in a household which variety to plant and why? This is a very critical question in terms of gender, in terms of social inclusion, because as we know, a lot of decisions at the household level have to do with power. There are a lot of social norms that inform who can have a say in certain decisions, not necessarily with crop varieties, but also with any other sort of important issues to be addressed at the household level. Crop varieties indeed are one of them. So we started by understanding how land is managed and allocated within a household, because we thought that this could be a first important aspect to know before to understand which other factors affects one's participation in decisions. Of course, land tenure aspects are very specific to each country, so we cannot make a global characterization of this. But of course, all in all, in most cases, men, especially household heads, are those who are more involved in decisions about which variety to plant. So being a landowner, which usually corresponds with the household heads, it was an important factor, but in some cases also holding land use rights. So having a plot that one can manage on its own could be also a factor for deciding indeed what to plant. In some cases, especially in Ethiopia and Kenya, we found some families where participating in decisions was motivated by the fact of being in charge of farm work, not being a landowner indeed, but just being part of this with a different distribution of responsibilities. So a lot of joint decision making within couples. And then the last point is about the crop, about management. Some of the crops that we targeted for our study were under the big knowledge of some of the household members. For example, in Ethiopia, a lot of women who were involved in the preparation of injera, for which teff or wheat could be used, were among the first to influence decisions because of their primary role in preparing something that is really a staple food. So here are just a few quotes that kind of speak partly to what I just presented. The first one is from a man in Ethiopia who explains that decisions are being increasingly taken within the couple, so between him and his wife. And the other one is a quote from a woman in Kenya who explains that she is indeed the one in charge of the farm, and she is also the one who decides what to plant. The husband does not want to get involved into it. Of course, we had many more nuances, so this is just to give you an example. The second part of the result, as anticipated, is about the factors that influence women's and men's varietal choices. So what are we going to plant and why are we going to plant this variety? This was, again, another big part of this research, which turned out to be very complex to analyze, which is the reason why at an analysis stage, we came up with three main categories of factors, so to speak, that influence in their own way decisions about what to plant. We're going to start with the first set of factors, which are purely contextual. So they don't necessarily have to do with the crop in itself, but with more with wider circumstances that influence significantly farmers' livelihood decisions. For example, the environment, social norms, again, policies or markets, and so on. And knowing these contextual factors, especially in contexts where social inequalities are very strong, it's important to understand how many possibility to choose one has, of course. Can I choose among many varieties or just among one or two, and why? So those you see in the first column are the factors that stood out the most when comparing results from the 6 different case studies. In at least 4 or 5 out of the 6 case studies, these were particularly relevant. The first one is input costs, and I'd say the one that was mentioned more frequently, especially fertilizers were reportedly the most difficult input to afford for most of the families, and for some also, of course, the cost of improved seeds. Soil fertility, which is also attached to the previous factors, was also another big challenge for everyone, reported both by women and men. Access to infrastructures more broadly, or more specifically to roads or transportation, was of course important to favor farmers' access to selling points, or also when it came to transport, for example, tubers, like in the case of sweet potato, from one place to the other. The times and the ways this could be transported was a critical issue. Not anyone can afford this. Not anyone has the time to do this, like many women reported. And where roads are not good, of course, farmers in more isolated area might be facing more issues than others. Then we have access to, here I said smartphones, but anything that could be considered an information channel, also radios, which are much more spread indeed, but smartphones are very difficult to afford, as we know, associated with literacy, which both, of course, are critical to get exposure to see the information, especially the information that is written, of course. And then last, social networks. So the fact of being part of the community, be it a group of neighbors or being a member to a farmer association, both of which were particularly critical at influencing exposure to information, but also at experimenting with new varieties. I forgot to say that these categorizations are also informed by various frameworks that you see here referenced at the bottom of those slides and in the So the next set of factors are trait preferences, but also how varieties were perceived, and I'll explain why. So what we did in our study was to understand which traits, which production, which processing, consumption traits farmers appreciated the most, and which of these drove their decisions to plant a variety or which variety to adopt. So the table that you see here, which is not very accurate, tries to just bring together the traits that were more frequently mentioned by farmers, both women and men, in relation to these categories. So, and the fact that they are categorized in this way is a product of our analysis, of course. When at country level, we tried to disaggregate preferences by gender, we found in most cases that women and men tend to have similar preferences, so tend to prefer this or prioritize similar traits. But women, of course, tends to be more specific in terms of traits preferences that have to do with processing and consumption, while men tend to be more specific on marketing traits, which is something that does not necessarily lead to prioritization at the time of varietal uptake. It speaks more to both genders' involvement in specific domains of specializations. What was really interesting to find out during this implementation of the questionnaires that we had designed at team level was to find that farmers tended to evaluate varieties based on their contribution to many of these domains. So we were trying to elicit information that was sort of category specific, so about production and processing, but indeed farmers tended instead to value each variety's contribution to many of these categories. And this is something not new in research. It has been reported not in plant breeding, I think, but also on other sustainable land management practices. This is how farmers tend to think of varieties. And I think it's very important also to point out that a lot of other uses came up when we asked farmers what they preferred about a variety. For example, ceremonial uses, about which we know a lot from literature already, were not definitely under the categories that we had thought about when we developed our questionnaires, but kept coming up in some of the transcripts. And it's important to point this out as much as many other uses that you see listed here. Another interesting aspect is that farmers tend to consider traits or ascribe the same traits to different categories depending on their intended function, which does not necessarily correspond to the way we would categorize the trait. For example, taste and color could be alternatively considered as functional to consumption or to marketing. What I personally found more interesting was higher yields, which we know being a production trait, or production-related traits, which was also by far the most mentioned traits all over the countries. So a very big preference towards higher yielding varieties. But higher yields are functional to food security or income security in farmers' responses. So the way farmers justified this preference was like this, which is why I prefer to cluster this under consumption and marketing in this specific case. The last and third set of factors are behavioral, which was sort of the core of this study right from the start. And this is more about choice behavior. So if a variety is accessible and I appreciate its traits, will I ultimately adopt it? Will I plant it? So what we observed in most countries was risk aversion as a very common attitude among many farmers, both women and men. Risk aversion and essentially the tendency not to undertake an action that is seen as potentially risky, like deciding to adopt or to plant something that I don't know how it will perform. So thinking that risk aversion applied to planting new varieties, these three main attitudes stood out the most. So the first one is the fact of knowing how a new, or not knowing, of course, how a new variety performs once this is planted. And this is because a lot of farmers were, of course, skeptical about planting something that they could not test on their own field, or that they could not compare with their own production conditions. As we know, some farmers have access to more fertile soil or to poorer soils. Some farmers can afford inputs, some others don't. And as long as they don't have information about this, or they have not had the possibility to experiment this, they may be skeptical and tend not to adopt it. The second one is about knowing whether a new variety fits local uses once this is processed or cooked. So we talk about varieties that are going to be used for consumption. We had cases like this in India, Ethiopia, and Uganda for maize specifically, green gram in India and Ethiopia for teff and wheat, where farmers were thought that adopting a new variety could alter the local recipe, alter the taste or the consistency of the food they were more used to eat, and so tended to adopt the local variety for consumption, and in some cases the improved variety for sales. And the third factor, and I will come back to this in the next slide, is about trusting the seed source, another very important driver or barrier, depending on how we see it. Knowing who is giving me the seeds or information about a new variety is very critical, and especially the type of relation that I have with this person or with this institution, the previous experience with them, and this was usually associated with the quality of the seed. So if I can trust this person or institution, I know that what they are giving me to try is of good quality. So the last part of the results is about seed promotion channels and which of these seem to be more effective, or which are facing limitations in reaching farmers or convincing them in trying new varieties. Again, the picture was very broad and diverse. So what we could do, at least for this global analysis, was to try to make a big synthesis and come up with two, let's say, big approaches that could kind of represent the main tendencies used or approaches used to promote seeds. And it doesn't mean that one does only stick to one of the two approaches. There might be some mixtures at some point. Top-down approaches, the first one, is essentially an approach where information about new seeds is unidirectional. So the seed source decides what information about the new variety the farmers needs to know. And there is little possibility for the farmer to follow up. We know this, for example, when new seeds are advertised through social media or radio. So the information comes to the farmer, but the farmer just has to read it or listen to it. Or official meetings where usually household heads were invited, of course, leaving out a big part of the population. On the ground approaches were much more interactive, meaning that there was more interaction between the person giving the information or the seeds and the farmers, who had the possibility to follow up, ask for more questions, or testify themselves how a variety was performing on a field, or try themselves. So I have grouped under this strategy, for example, any kind of everyday interaction among neighbors, peers, and so on. Other kinds of community gatherings where this information was conveyed, visits by champion farmers, of course, which was very effective, and trials. All of these, which is done on the field and with greater interactions, has broader reach because many more people get exposure, and information is given, is practical in that sense because one can see and try, and it's also given in an understandable language. And there is much more trust in the institution or person that gives this information because this person is considered having a good understanding of the local crop uses or the local the constraints that people are facing locally at producing those crops. This is just to end with the results, and I'd like to just read in full the first of the two quotes at the bottom left, because I think it synthesizes quite nicely the two approaches that I've just presented. It's from an agronomist in Kenya, who says, I have seen the strategy of meeting people on the ground, especially the champions or the lead farmers. You give them a variety to distribute and they will reach the ladies and the men, unlike when we out them in the shops and we ask them to go and pick it. So for us to be equal and for them to get the information equally, let it be near them, just at the ground level. Let us then close up with a few insights and corresponding recommendation, of course, which I'd like also you to think about. And of course, part of this could, of course, inform the discussion. So the first key insights is about practical experience, which is pretty much valued by farmer, as it allows them to appreciate how a variety performs and whether this suits their uses. So privileging experience-based approaches with new varieties, whereby farmers could see how this performs not just on the plot, so at the production level, but also in the kitchen or during processing, is very important for them to get a sense whether this works for them or not. Then on-the-ground approaches have proven to be quite effective in encouraging farmers to at least try new varieties, and at the same time, albeit not always intentionally, also more inclusive, because the language used is more inclusive and also the reach is much broader as it is on the ground again. So in that sense, I'd suggest to foster synergies between formal and informal seed promotion channels, and to boost the role of those actors who are much closer to the reality of farmers. The third and last one is about social inequalities, which we have seen popping up in almost any of the issues I have mentioned, which influence negatively participation in promotion, but also seed access to new varieties, as I have mentioned in the contextual factors slide. So in that sense, again, on-the-ground approaches could help make more informed decisions as to how to be more intentional at promoting seeds, addressing inequalities. And where we feel that our expertise cannot cover all of this, of course, think of collaborating with other actors who have greater expertise about tackling inequalities at the grassroots level, and involve, of course, other scientists who might bring in this kind of expertise. So with that, I am just putting together the few recommendations for you and probably for the discussions. This is just a last slide on the references used. And yeah, again, an overview of our very large research team. Thanks so much.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Martina. Excellent overview of your very important research. So we're going to move to question and answer in a moment. And if you have questions, you can already start to put them into the comment section. We'll also allow you to ask a live question if you'd like in a moment. But first, just to sort of take the temperature of the room on some of the recommendations that Martina has put forward, I'm going to launch another poll here. So it should have popped up on your screen. Just one question this time. I don't see any responses. Is it showing on your screen?
I can see it.
Okay, great. So I'll give you guys 10, 15 seconds or so just to put your thoughts in this poll. Okay, about half of the respondents have answered, so we'll give 5 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. And we'll take a look at our results. So 60 people responded. The question is, in your opinion, which recommendation is most vital to improving seed uptake? And the #1 answer was more experience-based approaches. So the field demos, the tastings, etc., at 45%. And then almost tied for second was boosting roles of champion farmers, local leaders, NGOs, and tied with fostering synergies between informal and formal seed networks. And then interestingly, tackling inequalities at grassroots level had the least responses, possibly because it might be the trickiest of the recommendations. But perhaps we can explore that in the Q&A. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vivian Polar, who is going to walk us through our discussion section. If you have questions, please insert them into the chat right now. Or if you would like to ask a question live, please put up your hand and we're happy to have you turn on your microphone and or camera to ask the question to Martina about her presentation. So I'll turn it over to Vivian.
Thanks a lot, Adam, and thank you, Martina, for that very insightful presentation. I'm afraid I do not see any hands up yet or comments in the chat. So perhaps while people start warming up, I'll formulate the question myself for you, Martina. We've seen that you've gone through a very intense process of engaging directly with farmers and different actors of the value chain in this process to understand what are the drivers, to understand how processes evolve. What do you think would be the biggest barrier to CGIAR networks adopting this type of approaches in research to understand better how to connect better with farmers?
Yeah, thanks so much, Vivian. This is a very important question indeed. I think when thinking of barriers, actually, and I was surprised to see also the results of this poll with which we ended the presentation. I think a lot of the approaches that were mentioned in the presentation are partly being already implemented. So I would say we are on the right track, but there is still something important missing that partly answers to the issue of social inequalities, which have come up as very critical at making promotion more inclusive. And it's not just because inclusion is good, it's because inclusion gets more people to decide and to share their preferences and of course pursue their livelihood objectives, right? So in that sense, since also the factors we have presented are so multifaceted, and it's not just about understanding trade preferences, I would really encourage not just the CGIAR, but also all the other actors who are and partners who are participating in this webinar in better exploring these synergies that I was mentioning, not just between formal and informal seed systems, but within different disciplines. So social sciences, nutrition sciences, breeding, of course, and much more. And also exploring partnerships with actors who are more active on the implementation sides, not from the research side, of course. Indeed, there are a lot of NGOs who are particularly active and effective at tackling certain inequalities. They know the context very well, and they also know which approaches may work best to get more women or more youth, for example, involved in anything else. It could be breeding, but also many other kinds of interventions. So I'd say this, and yeah, this would be sort of my recommendation.
Thanks, Martina.
Thank
I see the audience is not raising their hands yet or putting in the chat, so I'll shoot a couple of additional questions. Out of the results you gathered across different areas that you explored, contextual factors and all the different factors that influence uptake, what results did you find most surprising, something unexpected?
Yeah. Yeah, indeed, more unexpected than surprising. I think, and I'll come back to the slide on trade preferences, I think it was really interesting to experience how you spend a lot of time to prepare very detailed questionnaires documenting trade preferences by categories, because this is how we researchers tend to think. And then you go to the field and what you get is a slightly different answer. It reminds us that we as researchers, and in our case, farmers, we both build on very different knowledge, and we both have different understanding of the same topics. In this case, plant varieties and what drives decisions, right? And I think it was really interesting to not just to notice that their answers were slightly different from what we were trying to elicit with our questions, but they actually enriched our results much more. I really like to highlight again how important it is to understand, I think also for seed promotion, that farmers value the variety in total. So is this variety, for instance, is early maturity, but what else is this variety giving to me? So what other areas of my life is this contributing to, for instance, right? So yeah, I think this was the most surprising or interesting aspect, yeah.
Thanks, Martina. I see I have a hand up and then a question from Ana Maria. Let's go to Tedesse, who has his hand up first, and then we'll go to Ana Maria's question.
Thank you very much for the nice presentation. So my question is, the variety replacement rate in most of the developing world is very low. Some of the varieties grown like mega cultivars are more than 15 years old or 20 years old, very common in the savanna, sub-Saharan African regions. So in your opinion, is it because farmers rejected the varieties because of trade preferences, or is it because farmers do not have first access to the varieties? They don't know the varieties because of the demonstration issues, the policy issues, or the private-public partnership in the case of seed promotion. Some of the breeding companies, national breeders, they don't have even a kilogram of seed after release. So there are many issues when it comes to the seed. So it's not only trade preference or the participation of women or men farmers or youth. So how do you describe it? Is it awareness or availability, or is it trade preference? What is the key issue behind the adoption of the varieties after many releases we have registered in many different countries? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tadesse, for this very important questions. I'll try to answer your question. As you also correct, I think you partly answered the question already. And as our presentation shows, the reasons why these varieties are not taken up are many, and they are not just in the trade preference. Indeed, there are a lot of contextual factors that prevent some farmers to afford certain varieties or know about them, as you also correctly said. I remember a lot of cases where farmers and indeed even extension agents endorsed this idea and said they know about these varieties, but as long as they don't have access to fertilizers, this is a big issue to adoption. So it's not the problem with the variety in itself, but with something that is out of the variety, right? I think what could best answer your question would be the results that we got from the single country studies, because I think some circumstances are very specific to either a crop or a country. So in this global study, it was very hard to come up with one single factor that stood out as being the biggest driver in total. I'd say input cost was by far the most frequently mentioned, but we didn't dig so deep to also say that this is definitely the one that could be considered the biggest factor, because informational barriers were indeed also reportedly on the farmer side a very important issue. There were so many farmers who said, we do know that new varieties require a certain amount or combination of input, but if we don't know which kind of inputs we have to put together to farm this variety, or if we don't know whether this new variety would perform well on our field, how are we going to adopt it, right? So again, it's a very complex picture, and there is no one single answer that could work for Africa or globally, of course, right? So I think in that sense, country-specific results could speak more to your question. But I hope I at least answered to what you wanted to know.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martina. Maybe a very brief follow-up question from Ana Maria Haleman. She says, how are extension programs working on African countries to communicate the results of research and development?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. I must read it again.
So how are extension programs working on African countries to communicate the results of research and development?
I don't think I understand the questions. Maybe Ana Maria, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, good morning. My question is, like for example, in here in North America, especially, at North Dakota State University, we have programs that are from extension, and then they help to communicate those results between the, research sites, so the breeding, and also other different areas. So yeah, I was just wondering if there are specific extension programs that work to communicate those results.
Okay, no, now I get it. Thanks so much, Anna Maria. I think it's a very important questions, which unfortunately we did not capture with this research. There could be plans to communicate this research to the farmers, which is also part of doing good research, definitely. But yeah, I mean, if your question is more about what has been done so far, I cannot answer. But yeah, there is definitely intention to give back to farmers the results of this research. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ana Maria and Martina. I think we have a final hand up from Chris Ojeo. Chris?
Thank you. My quick question is with regard to the power dynamics. That was, I think, in the initial slides with regard to decision making on variety adoption, decision making with regard to seed replacement. And I think there was also something close to decision making with regard to land resources, which part of the land is for which crop and for which variety.
Mm-hmm.
Good information, but I just wanted to ask, in terms of practical application of that information, how do we use it for better targeting of our seed supply systems or delivery systems to ensure that there is better adoption of varieties, given that knowledge? How does that inform our seed systems interventions in terms of application? Should we use it to know if you're supposed to approach the lady of the home or the man of the home? I would just like to know how the practical application of that particular part of the power dynamics in terms of targeting of seed delivery, variety adoption, and seed replacement.
And if I understood your question correctly,
Yes.
It's about the land tenure part, right? How land is allocated within households, right?
My question is about that information. How do we apply it
Okay,
for
okay.
intervention? The application,
Yeah.
the application of that in terms of seed systems, targeting and intervention.
Yeah.
You already mentioned the land ownership and who decides on the use of land, who decides on which variety to be planted, who decides on when to replace seed. Sounds good, but I just wanted to know, how do we apply that information in terms of targeting of seed delivery, adoption of new varieties, and etc.?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. It's a very important question. So the information was included in our study because we wanted, first of all, to understand who takes decisions in which variety to plant. Because, of course, some breeding programs may breed varieties having women, for example, as a main target. But if women are not involved in decisions, then there is a sort of bottleneck in the process. So it's very important to consider this. Now, from an application side, I think again, back to my recommendations, the one I shared earlier, of course, these are inequalities that maybe the seed sector in itself may not be able to tackle, but again, collaborating with others, actors, for example, who might be more active at addressing those power inequalities could be helpful. But what a seed sector could do with thinking in terms of seed promotion is, for instance, in cases where we have men more involved in planting decisions and so also in production, and women more involved in processing and cooking, involving both of them on field days, even though women might not be the first involved in the farm or involved in decisions, but letting them come and let men participate in cooking trials where the variety gets tested out of the plot. So having both of them participating and appreciating how a variety performs in both dimensions, so to speak, can be very relevant. So this is the way how I would translate this into a practical recommendation for seed promotion. Yeah.
Thank you, Martina. I think
Thanks.
we had a very interesting question here from Ian, but I will let you think about it while Carly shares with us the presentation. The question from Ian is, are there any insights here to help guide what we call gender intentional breeding? And I'll leave you with that question to come back after Carly's presentation. And now Carly will share with us some highlights from the survey and experiment that was conducted under Market Intelligence for Package 5. Carly, over to you.
Thank you. This has been a really interesting discussion so far, and I don't want to take too much of your time, so I'll keep it brief. But so this great work that's being done under the Market Intelligence Initiative is just sort of one piece of a very large sort of scope of research. And part of what we're working on as the initiative is to really tackle all of these barriers that farmers might face in taking up new varieties. And as Martina mentioned, one of the sort of issues is trying to understand the varieties that will best suit farmers' needs, both men and women. And so as part of that, we want to talk not only to farmers, but we also want to talk to teams that are working on plant breeding, because we want to understand how those decisions are currently being made about sort of what varieties teams will develop, and how they're using those inputs from farmers and from other sources, so that as CG, we can provide sort of useful intelligence to the many breeding teams we have. And so for this, a plea is that we would love to have some of your expertise, since a lot of people in this virtual room, I'm sure, know a lot about plant breeding. And specifically, we are conducting a survey, and the people that are eligible to take this survey are plant breeding experts. So essentially, that's people that work on plant breeding, so plant breeders, or people that work directly with plant breeders to help inform decisions. And this might include both social and natural scientists. It's not just CG, so we are interested in the opinions of CGIAR, breeding experts, but also breeding experts from any type of organization, so NARAs, academic institutions, things like that. Everyone is welcome to participate, and we would really appreciate different types of inputs. And so, as I sort of mentioned, the focus of the survey is how breeding programs use market research in their decision-making, from different types of sources that will help us design better resources. Now, to sweeten the deal, because we know that your time is valuable, the respondents to the survey will be entered to win a Samsung tablet. So, make it a little bit worth your time. And so this survey is available in English, French, and Spanish. So we hope that you can please share it within your networks. Next slide. There we go. So how do I participate? So if you're sitting in front of your computer like I am, you can actually just take your phone, open up your whatever app reads QR on your phone, open it right up in your browser, and take it at your leisure during your holiday travels or right now. Or if you aren't in the place to scan a QR code, there's also a link that you can just put into your browser. It's a tiny URL /research for breeding. So yeah, we would really greatly appreciate your participation. And if you have any questions about this, please also feel free to leave those in the chat, and we can make sure to follow up with you. So maybe I can leave this up for a moment, but back over to, I guess, Adam. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Carly. I've actually put the survey link in the chat as well for people to find the survey if they'd like to fill it out. So I think we're going to wrap up, but there was one more interesting question, so I thought I'd give Martina a chance just to give a 1 minute or 2 minute answer to this. And I know this is very close to Vivian's work. And the question here is, from Ian, are there any insights here to help guide what we call gender intentional breeding? So if we can have a quick answer from you on that, Martina, and then we'll close off the webinar.
Thanks, Adam. I understand the question because there was a lot about seed promotion and much less on breeding, but we still mentioned the importance of trait preferences, and what comes up before trait preferences usually are the contextual factors that are what ultimately inform the needs for specific varieties, right? So there has been a framework we have used to interpret part of these results, which I can post later in the chat, which actually helps you to understand how contextual factors determine, so to speak, how farmers develop a specific need for varieties. And I think this is, so to speak, the flow that one could follow to understand how the two dimensions speak to each other. And then clearly, I believe a lot about gender intentional breeding has to do with promotion still, right? Because we want the varieties to be adopted. So breeding is a step in between. And then the variety has to go to the ends of the farmers and to their fields, of course. And in that sense, I think much of the insights that we shared in this presentation could also speak about how to address gender intentional approaches, how to improve gender intentional approaches also in breeding to make new varieties more accessible indeed.
Okay, thank you very
Sorry,
much.
Adam, because
oh,
I have my
yep.
microphone on, I'm just going to jump in to highlight 2
please do.
points
Yeah.
from Martina's presentation. One is the high input cost that came through very clear in the contextual factor, high input cost. So when we think about new varieties, let's consider what's the need for inputs and how we can reduce that cost. And the second one was low soil fertility, which is a big block and limitation, something to also consider in trade preferences. Thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, I thought you would have some input on that, Vivian, because I know that's very close to your heart, that work. Okay, so we will wrap up now, and so I'd like to thank Martina and Berber and Harley and Vivian for hosting the Q&A. And I guess we had around probably 120 participants at the highest. So thank you very much for taking your time during this possibly busy week, possibly relaxing week as we head into the holiday season. But I want to thank you for joining us for our first ever Crops and Seeds webinar. Please look forward to more of these in 2024, as well as opportunities to submit your pitches for ideas for sessions. So with that, I will thank everyone who was involved today and wish you a happy day or evening, depending where you are on our globe. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Adam, for hosting us. Bye-bye.
Well done. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.